Time now for the Sunday Talk. Tonight, the politics of hockey. For the first time since 1970, not a single Canadian NHL team has made it to the playoffs. And this week, a chain of emails emerged revealing just how seriously the NHL was rocked by its concussion problem. And it's not just the pros. House leagues have seen declining enrollment and soaring costs. So, does Canada's game deserve all the trouble it's facing?
This is the birthplace of hockey.
From frozen ponds to backyard rinks.
Backward skating, crossover, stop, pitch it with a pass, very top right.
Playing hockey has long been a rite of passage.
Kids skated out of the delivery room. It was just part of our culture. It was expected.
I'd like to get drafted out of college to the NHL.
A source of pride. Our history marked with moments of anguish and triumph.
Did he turn, get hit? Oh, did he ever?
But we've been learning more about hockey's dark side. This week, internal NHL emails from 2011 revealed just how concerned the league is about concussions, brain damage, and links to depression. That year saw a trio of funerals for young enforcers.
Fighting's part of the game. It's been a part of the game. It's the nature of the game.
The league has introduced harsher penalties for headshots, in minor hockey too. But for some parents, the danger is a deal breaker. For others, hockey is just too expensive.
It's equipment, it's ice, it's everything all rolled up into one.
I'm joined by our panelists. Jonathan Kay is editor-in-chief at Walrus Magazine. Stephen Marsh is a culture writer for Esquire. And Jen Barr is a CBC News producer and former producer at Hockey Night in Canada. So other than Jen Barr, of course, who's a bit of an expert on many of these things, this isn't really your typical hockey expert. We're not going to discuss how the Habs blew it or anything like that. It's more of a, more of a discussion sort of about, I guess, the Canadian cultural obsession. But before, and whether hockey deserves to be in the trouble it's in. But Stephen, let's all sort of reveal our personal level of obsession here. Stephen?
Well, you know, I was born in Edmonton in 1976. So when I was 8, Wayne Gretzky started bringing Stanley Cups home to where they belong, which is Alberta. And so I don't really have a choice about this. Like, I'm a hockey person. I'm always going to care about hockey. Every year I say, I'm not going to watch hockey. It's too much of a waste of time. And then the playoffs come around and I watch most of it. Yeah, it's like being a Catholic. Like, you know, you can lapse and you can not go to church, but you know, you're still Catholic. What about you, Jen? I'm assuming you love hockey.
I do. I still love the game. I worked in hockey for many, many years, for about 7 years, 7 seasons with Hockey Night in Canada as a story and a features producer. And I grew up in St. Catharines, which is a small hockey town as well, too. Always was. I have 2 older brothers. And I feel like maybe I was forced to sort of know the game at a young age, and I grew to love it. What about you, John? Not quite the same level of...
Well, I grew up in Montreal, and so I was immersed in the cult of the Canadians. But as I grew older, I actually developed a lot of unresolved and complicated feelings about hockey because the obsession with hockey in Montreal, as in many parts of Canada, a very parochial obsession in many cases, actually snuffed out some of the sports that I like even more. I was actually a huge Expos fan, and I became convinced that this monomania about hockey was one of the principal reasons that Montreal couldn't sustain a baseball team. I believe baseball is actually a superior game to hockey. I mean, no, hockey can be a very beautiful sport, especially when it's played at the Olympic level. Women's hockey, where there's no violence, I will watch that.
You have a daughter in hockey.
I have a daughter in hockey. She loves it very much. It's great exercise. But in terms of the Canadian culture and our fixation on this one sport, I find it embarrassingly parochial. And frankly, it's a Schadenfreude moment for me that hockey's being taken down a peg because maybe now we can actually learn about the 100 other sports that we should be appreciating.
That is so Canadian, that spirit, right? Just like overwhelmed, like where everyone else has love for hockey, you fill it with hate. Like you just can't take it. Of course, you'd have a strong reaction.
I'm more Canadian
It's
than
not just
anybody.
boring. It's just exactly more Canadian than the norm.
It has, though, been a troubled year, Jen. We mentioned in the setup pack the declining enrollment at the lower level and the bigger problems in pro hockey. Does the obsession need to be looked at again? Does hockey deserve some of the trouble it's in?
As much as it bothers me to say this, but yes, I think it does, because I do think that we do see some troubles on the horizon in all levels of hockey. I think first and foremost, too, we have to remember that the NHL is a business. It is a ginormous business with lots of money involved. And going all the way down to the minor leagues, the price, I know it's very expensive. It's time consuming, the equipment that people have to go through. It's really difficult to get at a higher level. And I do believe that it is in a little bit of trouble, but I still think at the end of the day that we need to remember what hockey's about and celebrate the game. And whether we like it or not, it really is a part of Canadian identity. And I mean, you look at the pack that you just aired tonight as well, too, and we can all relate to those moments. We all remember when Sidney Crosby scored the golden goal. We all know where we were, or in other games as well, too. Our favorite teams have won the Stanley Cup. It is really a part of our culture, and but I do think, yes, on all levels.
Isn't that part of what makes it so embarrassing? I mean, I feel like it's sort of like you go to some English soccer town and they still remember, the local team won some championship 30 years ago, and they just bore everybody about it. Like, it just seems like, can't we get past this? We're, G7 country, we've done all these amazing things, and we're still like nattering on about some goal that was scored by some guy 30 years. I mean, who cares?
I really disagree. I mean, I think it's one of those things that is nation building in a very positive way. I mean, I think when you go to New Zealand and you have their obsession with rugby, like, yes, in a sense that's parochial, but on the other hand, it's just part of what they are, and also it's something that they've brought with them from nowhere else.
But it's based on brutal tribalism. I mean, sport in general is tribalism, right? So it's all about how we knocked off the Russians, the Americans, or something. I mean, it's kind of a glorification of warfare in skates.
But through peaceful means. I think tribalism.
But it's not peaceful. I mean, a lot of these people, they go to the hockey games because they want to see people punch each other. It's ridiculous.
I can't disagree with that. I mean, you have me there. Like, the fighting is ridiculous, and all these other problems we're talking about. And the thing is, they're so soluble. I mean, it's not like football's concussion crisis, where it's like, what are they going to do?
But they're not soluble because it goes there's a primitive undercurrent in why people like it. So if they got rid of the hockey, they'd lose half the fans.
But Jen, the numbers are down, right? There used to be a lot more fights, a lot more brawls. There have been changes. Is that making a difference?
I actually believe that in my lifetime that we might not see fighting. It's with the rule changes, I believe it's completely going to be weaned out. And I do think that we will say that. And I actually would say, as a hockey fan and working in the broadcast of it, or other fans of hockey, no one really enjoys seeing Sidney Crosby down on the ice. Yeah. No one enjoys seeing players that can't move. That is a horrible, brutal side of hockey. And I just think that there's a little bit of a separation, and we have to remember like what the good things are about hockey as well too. And I know I sound maybe a little bit preaching, but there are really good things about it. Team atmosphere, coaches volunteer their time.
Yes.
That's true of any sport.
But I think when you look at, like, to me, the thing is when you look at the World Juniors, for instance, which I watch religiously every year, like, those are wonderful games. They're so enjoyable to watch. And then you go back to the NHL. I mean, we were talking about this. Patrick Kane hit the 100-point mark. I think it was yesterday. And he's the third person in 5 years to make it. I mean, the NHL is a business. I wish they were better at their business, right? Which is not grinding, grueling, brutal sport, but some expression of joy, which it's just really hard to find in these games now, I think.
If it's so brutal and so awful, John, why do you have your daughter in hockey?
Well, actually, I will say women's hockey is great because they're really, I've gone to see games here. Sometimes they play at in Ryerson, and you'll get top-level women's hockey, and it's fantastic. There's just never going to be a fight that breaks out. I went to a Maple Leafs game a couple of years ago. There was guys in front of me on their smartphones. The only time they actually looked at the ice was when two goons started smashing each other.
Well, and enrollment among women is up.
Absolutely.
That's the exception, right?
And that's a good thing. I love the game of women's hockey. I think it's a shame that only 5% of women's sports in general get the airtime and broadcast in any sport that they need. But women's hockey, I mean, let's face it, the gold medal game in Sochi, for example, our last Olympics, that was the best hockey game out of that Olympic Games.
And it was huge. And people here felt it hugely. They really did. It wasn't some kind of like concession, or like people were glued to television.
I just think we have a long way to go in that, I'm sure, too. We're not where we should be with women's hockey as far as broadcasting or as far as showing more of that level. We only see them on a national level, and I think we're decades away from actually being what they deserve.
So performance is down, enrollment is down, the costs. I mean, how big? Why is it changing? Is it
Great thing is it doesn't matter because like it's so embedded in experience here.
But it's so embedded in life.
I
mean, is it demographics? Is it fear of the fighting? Why has it been seeing such troubled times?
I mean, to me, it's just bad management. I mean, it would be just like a small series of bad decisions, like allowing fighting to continue as much as they have and so on, like not being faster on it. But, I think it kind of doesn't matter because people love hockey in this country so intensely that even with bad management, it'll always survive. It'll always have this huge place in our hearts.
That says something about us.
Yes,
it
it
says
definitely
that we're
does.
idiots, and they'll go spend $300 on a Maple Leafs ticket, even though they always lose. Like, I mean,
But maybe
it's
you're winning. Maybe your argument's getting through, John, that because more kids are being enrolled in soccer and
I think it's a good
basketball
news
and-
story. I mean, you look at Canada as a basketball country, or 50 other sports. Now you have a talented 10-year-old, and you're not automatically saying you're going to be the captain of the school hockey team. They have more options. To me, that shows we're a more sophisticated, cosmopolitan country. The more we suck at hockey, the more it shows that we're sophisticated. So I actually am going to flip it around and say it's a good news story. As I say, people are spending a week's worth of discretionary income to take their kids to go see hockey. Like, that's just, it's wrong. The value system is wrong.
How much does it cost?
To go, like, you mean just at a rep level, at house league level? Like,
Yeah, give us an idea.
It varies. I mean, I don't have kids in it, but I have family that's in it or whatever too. It's thousands of
But
dollars a
high-level
year.
kids, it could be $30,000.
Absolutely.
$30,000.
And that includes your hotel
high-level kid
expense.
going to tournaments.
Yep.
And, I mean,
A
it's-
year.
Equipment, hotel expenses, travel. It's very expensive, extraordinarily time consuming. The amount of games they play per weekend is ludicrous half the time too. It's you know, I do believe in it, but I also, to your point, I completely agree too. Basketball and soccer are amazing sports, and we're even getting better at it as a nation too. And I think a lot of kids are geared towards that. And I have friends who have kids who would never put their children in hockey because of the violence, because of the cost, and their kids are super athletic in many other sports. So,
But do you think it can be saved?
Well, you know,
obviously?
we say this, and then, you know, the newspaper reports on that brilliant 10-period game out east. And, you know, it's a great national story. It's on the cover of national newspapers, right? And there's a reason for it. That just speaks to our experience, I think. Like, that was just such a Canadian story. 10 periods of play, and they kept going. It's so great.
Well, next year we'll be back in, right, John?
but maybe next year that there'll be more Canadian teams in the playoffs, though. Yeah.
Yes. Thanks so much, guys. That was great.